Hello, I'm Hoblin Harry, and welcome to the first installment of Virtual History, the show where I combine my love of video games with my degree in history to discuss the history of your favorite video games. Now, no, I'm not talking about the development history. I mean the history inside the games. Today's lesson plan is the Fallout series. Keep in mind, I'm not giving plot summaries of the games, rather the background that drives the setting of the games. The world we see in the Fallout series is a result of the Great War. That is the war between China and America, but we'll get to more of that in a minute. After World War II, the history of Fallout turns into an alternate timeline from our own. The 1950s feel that we see in Fallout, it doesn't actually take place in the 1950s. They kept that culture well into 100 years after the 1950s. Also, the United States made great progress in robotics, bringing many popular models such as the Mr. Gutsy military robot and the Mr. Handy helper robot. Leading up to the Great War were the resource wars, which started in 2052. Oil supplies began depleting, and the oil-dependent European Commonwealth responds to rising Middle East oil prices with military force. The United Nations struggles to keep the peace, but many countries begin withdrawing and the UN eventually collapses. In 2059, the United States establishes the Anchorage Front Line to protect the Alaskan oil fields, and the United States pressures Canada into allowing the free access through the country in order to better reinforce the Anchorage Front Line. The battles between the European Commonwealth and the Middle East come to a halt as the Middle Eastern oil fields run dry, and the European Commonwealth falls apart as the member nations begin fighting among themselves for the last remaining resources. True to American fears over their oil fields in Alaska, China invades in 2066. Tensions arise between Canada and the United States, as Canada is not fully cooperative in accommodating transport through the country. Canada is eventually fully annexed by the U.S. in 2076. Thanks to the development of power armor, the U.S. is successful in pushing out the Chinese in 2077. On October 23, 2077, nuclear bombs are launched. It was never recorded if the Chinese or Americans launched first, or if they were even the countries that launched the bombs at all. What is known is that their air raid sirens were sounded, and those fortunate enough made it into the vaults, which were then sealed, leaving all those outside to the fate of the wastelands, the effects of radiation, and the twisted mentalities created by the harsh realities of a post-apocalyptic world. The vaults are underground fallout shelters developed by Vault-Tec with the government funding. There are 122 documented vaults, and the first vault was built in Los Angeles to publicly demonstrate their viability. As a result, most of the first vaults were built on the West Coast. Most of the vaults were completed by 2063, just over a decade before the Great War. While touted as a humanitarian effort, with only 122 vaults built, it was never really an effort to save humanity. More of an effort to save the quote-unquote important people, and was commissioned by the Enclave, a shadow movement within the U.S. government. Supposedly, many of the vaults were built specifically for those involved with the Enclave, and I'll get more on the Enclave in a minute. Another purpose of the vaults was for social experiments, a sort of social Darwinism project for the second stage of humanity, which would repopulate the world after the Great War. Some of the experiments include Vault 12, whose doors were not designed to shut all the way, resulting in radiation leaking into the underground facility. Vault 13 was designed to stay closed for 200 years to test the effects of prolonged isolation. Vault 69, of the 1,000 residents, only one was a man. In Vault 106, psychoactive drugs were released into the ventilation. As for the Enclave, they resurfaced after the bombs dropped and claimed that they were the survivors of the pre-war American military, and they should assume control. The Enclave holds many bases throughout the United States and remain a nuisance for the next 200 years after the Great War. On the flip side is the Brotherhood of Steel, a faction of Army deserters based out of the Mariposa military base in California. They learned of the horrors of the forced evolutionary virus, a virus designed by the Enclave, at the base, and took it over shortly before the Great War. The base kept them safe, and they re-emerged shortly after the nuclear holocaust and began their new mission, which is to scour the land for technology. Their exact motives are unknown, but it is known that they are at odds with the Enclave. As of the events of Fallout 3, the timeline is at 2277, exactly 200 years after the Great War. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to my brief history of Fallout, and I hope you guys see the kind of direction that I want to take this in. For the next series, I plan on doing MYST.